Now, no place in the world is immune to climate change and its effects on agriculture. Well, that was the topic of a Gates Foundation seminar this week here in Washington. And joining us now is Lindiwe Majele Sibanda, who attended the seminar, and she heads the Food, Agriculture and Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network, or FANEPAN. The network works for food security in 13 Southern African countries. Ms. Sibanda, welcome to our show In Focus.
Thank you very much.
Now, from this seminar, how adversely is Africa impacted?
Well, as you know, Africa is dependent on agriculture, and climate is about weather. Agriculture is dependent on water and the soils, and Africa currently cannot feed itself because the soils are depleted and rainfall is variable. With the adverse impacts of climate change, we are definitely going to be the hardest hit continent.
And of course, we keep hearing all the time how Africa is one of the smallest contributors to this climate change, yet it's bearing the brunt of it. Yep. What would you say are the visible signs of this impact on the ground?
I think the biggest challenge that we face is that we never fully embrace technology for improved productivity in agriculture. If you look at dependence on rain-fed agriculture, we only have 4% development in irrigation. So it means the rest of the continent is dependent on rain-fed agriculture. So if water is in short supply, it means you cannot grow any crops. The other challenge we have is the use of improved seed varieties. Africa, in terms of adopting hybrid seed varieties, in some countries it's as low as 10%, the adoption rate. What that means is that we are harvesting 1/3 of the potential harvest we could get if we're using improved seed varieties. So all that talks to poor investment in research, poor investment in extension, and really poverty, which prevents people going into the market to buy the expensive inputs.
Now, why would you say there's so little input or research in this field when Africa is obviously so heavily dependent on agriculture? Why isn't there that issue of maybe improving or working on genetic modifications, improving the irrigation systems? What's the problem?
I think the challenge we face is that we've been dependent on public funds. If you look at under the Comprehensive Agricultural Development Plan, CADEP, our heads of states committed in year 2003 to committing 10% of the national budgets to agriculture. And up to now, less than 10% of the African countries have met that minimum, and it's a bare minimum. And then the other component is, if you look at developed countries, research is driven by the private sector. They invest in research technologies, which they can then market and get their profits. But currently, for most of Africa, we are dependent on public funds, and the public funds into agriculture are very thin. So as a result, there's very little on the shelf for people to take up.
The Food and Agriculture Organization just came out with some figures recently on World Food Day that 1 billion people worldwide are undernourished. And Africa, of course, is a big chunk, bears a big chunk of that. What is being done to counter this potential food shortages, which are already severe as it is?
I think what's clear now, we now know where the problem is. After independence, most of the African states embraced a policy of export your raw commodities, do not concentrate on your staples, rely on international trade, and somebody will be able to feed you either through food aid or you can buy from the international market. Now, the food crisis in 2008 was a clear signal that if you cannot produce your own staples, you cannot rely on the global market. The markets can fail you. People closed their borders. Those who had excess food tended to biofuel, and Africa was left in short supply. So the main message now is that we have developed a plan under CADEP, and it looks at 4 main pillars. Pillar 1 is investment in water and soil. Pillar 2 is in infrastructure and markets. Pillar 3 is food security, and Pillar 4 is research and technology adoption. If all Africans can put their money into that framework, which looks at the basics, and also to put the farmers first. For a long time, our farmers are subsidizing the urban community. Farmers are growing the food, they have little access to inputs, but the urban electorate, which is the voting electorate, is given food for free. Okay, and I think those are plans.
Well, that's a wealth of information. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And of course, that was Ms. Lindiwe Majele Sibanda, who joined us here in our Washington studios.